Like I said, good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy days to tune in to today's session on supercharging your campaigns. My name is Imran Ahmed, and I head up the client servicing function here for the data products at YouGov in MENA, essentially working with brands and agencies who are interested in syndicated research we provide in the market. And really, today's session is born out of some discussions that we've had with various people across the agencies, from both media agencies and PR agencies, to really sort of hit home how important research is in the whole creative process. So we'll start by looking at why research is so critical to the creative design process and how it can help deliver more engaging campaigns. We'll then look into YouGov Profiles, our newly launched audience segmentation tool here in MENA, and how it can help you supercharge your campaigns. And I'll talk through an example of a brand that's had some PR issues and see how profiles can help identify, define, and better target a specific audience based on that. And then we'll look to build up a detailed understanding of that audience and show the kinds of things that we can share with the creative team so that they can tailor your campaign or your communication to really resonate, to reach and resonate and invoke the desired reaction within our target group. We'll then actually jump into the platform very quickly for a quick demo, and I'll just show you how simple it is to really explore the data and identify the audiences, and learn more about them in a level of detail that we're not really used to in this region specifically, and now we're going to be able to do so using YouGov Profiles. Before I do this, though, just to recap for those who aren't fully aware of who YouGov are, we'll just talk a bit about who YouGov are, and then we'll jump straight into the rest of the session. So YouGov are a data and analytics company. We are involved in collecting consumer opinion and behavioral data across the globe every single day. We have around 10 million panelists globally now who have opted in sharing their opinions on a wide variety of topics, and knowing that their feedback is going to help shape the world that we live in. The proposition is basically the more that people participate in the decision-making by institutions, the better they're going to be served by those institutions. The better the decisions those institutions make, and so the better they'll be served. And to this end, we're constantly capturing data streams across the globe by a variety of platforms, and all of this data then sits in our connected data library, which we refer to as the YouGov Cube. In terms of our systems, what they do is they aggregate all of this panelist responses over time from the various surveys that they take part in, and give us a well-rounded view of these respondents' behaviors and preferences. The Cube then in turn powers all of our user-friendly data tools, of which Profiles is one, which we will explore further on in the session. The other product that we have in the syndicated stream, as we can see here, is the Brand Index platform. And that is basically our daily brand perception tracking study. And in the example that we'll look on later on in the session, I'll show you how we can use both of these tools together to really help our clients achieve their campaign objectives and really help take out the guesswork from the whole creative process. So in terms of research in the creative process, I mean, there's obviously a number of models that sort of showcase how this process typically flows. But in the essence of all of them, essentially, is you start off with a problem or a brief and end up with some kind of campaign or activation, which you then evaluate. So this particular diagram, I mean, the labels might change. There might be a few additional stages in there. But essentially what you have is you have a brief or some kind of problem, you do some research around it, ideally, and then you go into the brainstorming based on that, create some sort of creative, analyze it, make sure it's fit for purpose, and then execute against it. That's the theory anyway. What we've been hearing a lot from professionals in the industry is oftentimes there isn't enough time, or timelines are so squeezed that they don't have sufficient time to actually conduct that research and analyze it and then convert those into ideas. So the research phase is either skipped or glossed over when it comes to the actual creative creation or ideation stage. And so the campaigns you end up with aren't based on the data. A creative strategy director that I was recently speaking to at a leading global public relations company recently outlined that often what he finds is the research phase is missed over altogether, like I said, because the teams are so pumped up. They've already got ideas as soon as they've received the brief, and they really just want to crack on with the ideation stage because that's what they're, they're so used to. They're the creative types. They want to get on and start coming up with ideas. And what happens is...
Hi, Imran. Sorry, I think the presentation is not visible to some of the participants. Can you check if it's working correctly? Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, okay. Bear with me. Let's see. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Can you let me know if it's now working?
Yeah, I think we can see it. If people in the chat can confirm if it's visible to everyone. Okay, great. Yeah, good to go.
Right. Sorry about that. Okay. I mean, I guess everything I've said so far hasn't really required a slide as such. It's all been sort of theoretical. You can now see the slides, so hopefully it'll make a bit more sense moving forward. I will obviously share this deck afterwards, and everyone can sort of review it in conjunction with the session that's being recorded anyway, if you really want to. But yeah, I mean, so going back to the sort of creative stage, basically what I was saying was we've heard from various professionals that it's typically being skipped over, and because of the lack of time or so on. And in a recent conversation that I was having with a creative strategy director, he was mentioning that the stage is typically skipped over because people have already got ideas and they want to sort of run and start creating the creative straight away. And often what happens is the creatives are then based off of hunches. And he argued that what they actually need is more people in the creative teams who actually love data. People who are able to understand it and translate it into practical ideas for the creative. In the absence of these types of people, he argued that much of the creative ideation still is based on these hunches, the sort of, I've heard this, or I think these people are like this, or these people really like this in my opinion, or I've heard so-and-so say this about this particular audience. And the issue with that, he went on to suggest, was that typically what happens when creatives are based on hunches is you ignore a lot of the research and you end up with content or campaigns that are generic in nature. You get these sort of shampoo type adverts that are also showing super shiny, short, straight, long, and full of volume hair, or you get cars that are shown, riding on the dunes, where the typical SUV owner will, is unlikely to ever take their car off-road. So is it actually reaching out to an audience and resonating with them in any way? Or you end up with stereotypical campaigns. So you get vacuum cleaning or clothes washing brands, and you get this a lot with them. So they, end up having a woman cleaning up some sort of unnatural spill with ease using the product that they're advertising. It completely ignores a significant and growing proportion of the population that are now taking part in these tasks at home. There are, 30%, I think, was the stat that I last read, of households have the male actually vacuuming. So, campaigns like this aren't addressing those audiences in such a way that is relevant or reflective of the modern world that we live in. Or you end up with something that comes across as disingenuous. So I know the global example that a lot of people cite is the Pepsi, the Kendall Jenner advert, where they sort of were seen to be jumping on the Black Lives Matter bandwagon. In MENA, we had something that a lot of people have compared to that, which was the Coca-Cola adverts around when females were allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia again, and claiming that Coke was the change had a taste, and it was the tagline. It was sort of promoting Coca-Cola, and a lot of people pushed back on that idea that they were involved in that change in any way. So it had a lot of negative reaction. So do any of these actually work? Are they impactful? Are they resonating with the audiences? You're spending thousands of dollars on creating these campaigns, with no data really backing up the ideas. It's all based on these hunches. And if they're not resonating with the audiences, are you going to be earning the return on investment that the clients want to see? So, again, just highlighting that data should really be underpinning all of these decisions around the idea. What if we could, really understand these audiences better that we want to target, to agree where we know what they like, what's important to them, what's informing their purchasing and their consumption behavior, and all of that time in a timely manner. With these syndicated products, the research is already done. We've already collected all this data about these audiences. So we can pull off this data in a much more timely manner. So the time constraint doesn't necessarily inhibit our ability to use this data. And you're then able to create these, or you're then able to feed into the creative process with data that will then potentially lead to campaigns that are going to resonate better and have, in the end, a better return on investment. This is where we think YouGov Profiles can be tremendously helpful in the planning phase, and it's been successful around the globe. When we're talking about planning, so with profiles, what we're essentially talking about is identifying these audiences that we're interested in and that we want to understand and engage with our communication. Then describing them in a great depth and granularity, as we've never been able to do so before, and then really target them. So speak to them when and how they most prefer to be communicated with. And that's what profiles will help us understand. Profiles, as I said, it's recently launched here in MENA. We've got our first data set about 10 weeks ago, and we've been refining it over that time and growing it. Already we have around 12,000 data points here in the UAE, and that's going to, set to grow organically over time, and with increasing rich data points. And it's the kind of thing that has grown tremendously around the world, and we expect to get more local stuff, more local content in there that's important or useful to the planning teams at your agencies and your brands and so on. So watch the space in terms of how that grows. The real differentiator between our platform and anything else that's out there in terms of audience segmentation and planning is the cadence of the refreshing of the data. So the fact that we have weekly data sets makes profiles really powerful, especially in the world that we currently live in. It's changing so rapidly. Keeping your finger on the pulse of how perceptions are changing of brands and how consumption behavior is changing, it's vital to be able to ensure that any strategies that we have for our communications are relevant now and are not based on data that was collected a year ago and so on. So really, what kind of data points do we actually have in the platform? I guess that's probably the next logical place to go to. What we did for this was we looked at globally where we've already had profiles running for a number of years and understood which of these variables were most utilized by both brands and agencies alike, and really started with those over here. So they're globally consistent with how they're asked around the world, and they help. They're the most useful ones that are generic enough to ask around the globe. So beyond the demographics like age, gender, region, income, and all the sort of standard nationality type breaks that we're used to talking about when we're talking about audiences in this region, we can start to understand a lot more about their interests of these people, their hobbies, their attitudes, their opinions around values and beliefs, the things that are going to impact their behavior and their consumption. Their media consumption, so data points around how much TV are they watching, when are they most likely to be watching, what are they listening to in terms of radio, what genres of magazines are they interested in, and so on. We're going to build on our social media data, so understand which platforms they're most engaged with, and how frequently are they doing so, how much time are they spending on it, and so on and so forth as well. And then Brand Index, which was the other platform that I mentioned, feeds all the brand usage and perception data into profiles as well. So it really allows us to understand which brands a given audience is already consuming, for example, which brands are they considering, which brands are they satisfied or dissatisfied customers of, which have they got a positive or a negative impression of, and so much more. And we'll look at that when we jump into the platform as well. Like I said, it's a newly launched product, so we'd love to hear more from you guys, the people in the industry, to see what kind of data points would be more helpful for you as well to understand when you're in your planning phases, to really help refine the tool, make it as user friendly and as as useful to you guys as it can possibly get. We've got an email address in here, mina.dataproducts@YouGov. With any suggestions that you might have, feel free to reach out to them. Alternatively, just reach out to myself directly, or through our partners, the PRCA, you can reach out to them and they can feed that back to us as well. Okay, so what I wanted to do was really look at a use case now to showcase how powerful profiles can be. What we did for this particular use case was look at a brand that's had a PR crisis in the recent past. And what I did for that was I went through brand index in the UK, where we are currently tracking around 600 plus brands across 23 sectors. And I identified brands that had the largest increase in negative impression over the course of the year. And in this particular example, what we can see is the UAE exchange, which obviously had a lot of PR around it, a lot of negative PR around it earlier on during the course of this year, specifically related to senior management within it being implicated or being assumed to be involved in debt fraud or fraudulent financial activity. And sort of mid-March, we saw that they were suspended from any new transactions taking place. And around that exact time in brand index, we can see that their net impression, as shown by the gray line here, declined significantly. So they were sort of pre-crisis hovering around the 25 to 30 mark in terms of net respondents saying they've got a positive impression around the brand. And then when that crisis happened, you can see the positivity started declining. So less people were saying they had a positive impression, and more people were saying that they had a negative impression of the brand, resulting in that net decline. And you can see it's not recovered since then. So really, who are these people? What are their sort of thoughts and beliefs? How can we sort of talk to these people? In an ideal world, if UAE Exchange was still able to operate, they would be interested in this audience to really understand how they can turn their perceptions around and keep them with the brand. In the absence of that, their competitors, they're going to be interested in it. How can we attract this low-lying fruit? These people are already disenfranchised with this particular brand now. They've got a negative general impression, increasingly negative general impression. How do we attract them to ourselves? So, the likes of Al Ansari or Western Union, may want to understand better who this audience are and how they can attract this group. So really, what we're going to do is look at profiles, and using profiles, understand who this group is, what are their likes and dislikes, what are their opinions, attitudes, where can they be found, and really, what's the best time and place to sort of reach out to these people. So what I'll do now is I'll quickly jump into profiles and show you how easy it is to build that particular audience in the platform, and how easy it is to then explore all of this data and all this rich data around these people that we know have now got a negative impression about that brand. And then we'll show you how that can be fed into the creative process to really help that process ensure that they come up with a messaging that's relevant to the audience that they're trying to attract here. So just going to swap over now to profiles. If you can just confirm, someone on the chat, that they're able to now see the screen showing profiles, that would be really helpful. Brilliant. Okay, so I'll start off with how it would be. So this is the landing page in profiles. So when you actually come into the platform, you'll be greeted with this particular screen. And what you have essentially on the left-hand side here is a data tree that's obviously expandable and explorable. And you can obviously find all the great and interesting points in there. And on the main part of the screen, you can see two audience groups that you have to define. The first is the audience that you're actually interested in understanding. And you can create that using the new filter function. and then the control group, so the audience that you want to compare them to really understand the differences between our target audience and maybe, for example, the general population. So in terms of understanding the audience or defining the audience that we're interested in, we want to look at those people with a negative impression of UAE exchange. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a new filter. Within here, I mean, obviously you can search for the bits that you're interested in searching for, but I know that all that brand data, so impression is one of the metrics that comes out of brand index that sits in the brand folder. So I'm going to go ahead and navigate to that, expand that. I'm interested in those that have a negative impression. So I go ahead and choose that. And I'm interested in, from within all the sectors that we have that we're tracking in brand index in the UAE, I know that the UAE exchange sits within this sector. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that in here. And then, so you can see it's really simple user interface, drag and drop functionality. And I'm interested in those that have a negative impression of UAE exchange. So I go ahead and just tick that. And it tells me the number of people that we have of the total that we've profiled at the moment. And you just give it a name. So negative impression UAE exchange. And then you just go ahead and save that audience. I'm not going to save it because I've already created it. So I'm just going to go ahead and load that up here. And then choose an audience you want to compare it to. So go ahead and select the NatRep audience because I just want to see how they're different to the general population. And then it's really a case of exploring what you're interested in. So you can see, you can click on the variables one by one to see how these things differ, or drag whole folders to identify where those significant differences are. So you might want to start with the demographics, it's the standard starting place. So I go ahead and select gender, for example, and I can see the NatRep audience has got a 69% male audience, 31% NatRep females. Whereas in this audience, i.e. those that have got a negative impression of UAE exchange, it's over indexing on the males. So 84% of this audience are male. And that's a statistically significant difference as defined by this particular green box here with a Z-score over 2. So that's the sort of way you sort of interpret this data. And you just go ahead and start exploring all the other data points. You can drag them in one by one, add them to the group, and you can then see that this group is statistically more likely to be 45 plus than the general population. And so, this is how you sort of start to build up and just drag and drop all the interesting variables that you can. Or you can, like I said, just drag the whole folder in. And then what it does, the system will go through all the variables that sit, or all the sort of questions that sit within psychographics. So you can see it's going to go through all these attitudes on all of these particular things, their hobbies and interests, their personality traits, churn through all of those data points and see where there's statistically significant differences between our target audience and the general population, and highlight them to you, and show that those are the ones that are significantly different. And you can go through and do this for all of the folders. This might take a bit of time because obviously there's a lot of data points to go through, but this is where you would sort of go through and find the bits that are interesting. Once you find the data points that you're actually interested in, you can pin them, and you can see it then creates a little pinned variable here. And then once I found ones that I'm actually interested in, enough of them, or all the ones that I'm actually interested in looking at later on, I'll go ahead and save them in a folder. So you can see I've already done some saving here before. So instead of going through all of these folders, I just thought I'd quickly show you some of the interesting points that came up on these. So I've saved some of these in terms of hobbies. Let's go ahead and look at where these guys are. Bear with me. Oop. Why is that not picking it up? All right, there we go. So general interests, they've got interest in businesses and finance. They're significantly different here, as you can see, international news, sports, and so on. And you can explore all the other ones as well. So they're interested in historical sites, cinemas, museums, more so than the general population. And you can obviously go through and do that for all of these. So demographics and lifestyle. I've gone ahead and done this, so we can go through each of these, but obviously there's hundreds of data points in here that I've already identified. But really, the point I want to sort of really hit home here is we're now looking at this audience, understanding them way beyond just their demographic makeup, and really sort of understanding their likes and dislikes. What are they engaged in? What are their, what are their interests? And that way, we're able to then inform our creative process about who this audience is, what their likes and dislikes are, and then they can create creatives that are much more interesting or relevant to this particular audience. Okay. Right, so one of the things you can do from the platform is export that data in Excel. And now, based on the feedback that I've had from the conversations, again, sharing that data in a tabulated Excel format might not necessarily bode well with the creative types. They might sort of look at it and again, sort of skip over it and start focusing on their own ideation based on their hunches. So really, it might be a case that we need to help them and create a pen and portrait, something like this. So based on the data points that I've already picked out, I created a little pen and portrait of who these people are that have a negative impression or a declining general impression of the brand. And this is then a lot easier for the creative types to look at and start coming up with a strategy or a communication that is going to be relevant to these people. So you can see beyond the demographics, which are sort of males, 45 plus, Asian subcontinent based people, generally more likely to be living in Dubai with a sort of middle income, but concerns over their income moving forward. And these are people that have said that they don't see enough people like themselves or real people in advertising. So they might want to see more people that represent them in advertising, instead of these glossy, stars that we have in a lot of campaigns. They're interested in brands that express views that they're interested in, that are important to them. And they're more likely to buy from brands that advertise along those lines. And they like brands that are willing to get involved in social issues. And some of the issues that we can see that they're, interested in include the environment, sustainable brands, and, their products are designed with care and consideration for it. Climate change is the biggest threat to the civilization. These are things that are really important to these individuals. We already saw that they enjoy watching TV, and you can see they're roughly doing 15 hours of TV per week, interested in genres around sports, comedy, and business. Magazines, same again, financial and travel type magazines. Again, just getting an idea of what they're reading, what are their, where might we want to speak to these people? In terms of advertising, they've sort of said that they noticed advertising that's typically out of home or in the cinemas, even now. So that, they're still saying that those are the main places where they actually recognize more so than the general population. So again, we're really highlighting where this audience differentiates from the general population. And in terms of their expectations from advertising, they should entertain them. Sponsorships influences their decisions. So maybe some sort of mention of that they'll be sponsoring certain things. They want to see more people like themselves in it. In terms of their lifestyle, they watch TV, like I mentioned, play sports, and they're interested in board games. Visiting historical sites, museums, and cinemas, as we already mentioned. Sports, typically middle-aged Indians. Again, cricket is their top sport. Tennis, football, they're also interested in. Channels that they're actually watching sports on, so 10 Sports and OSN Sports are channels that you might want to consider as well. And then also the brands that they're already engaged with. So, the likes of WhatsApp is something that they're using already. YouTube, malls that they like to shop at, so Festival City Mall, Dubai Mall are, outperforming versus the general population. They're already part of loyalty schemes. They are, shopping at Lulu and online at Amazon more so than the general population as well. So, these are the types of brands that you might want to show in that they are consuming. And, if you want to make it relevant to these people or show that these people that we're using in our campaigns or in our ideas are representatives of them, might want to include some of these in any campaigns that you're doing. So, I don't know, maybe you end up with a campaign that's, out of home or cinema based, that's showing a middle-aged Indian man playing, I don't know, some kind of board game, maybe Ludo with his family, receiving messages on WhatsApp, highlighting that he needs to share some money back home. So he heads over to an exchange in his favorite mall, transfers some money, and then return home to watch the football that's sponsored by, Al Ansari or whichever brand we're working with. And then they sort of receive a confirmation message that they received the funds from their loved ones, but also maybe a notification that 20% of their transfer fee is going to be transferred or donated to planting trees, or some other environmental cause that will really sort of resonate with this particular audience. Massively oversimplified, but you can see how this type of data could then feed into the creative process, so that you know who you're talking to, and instead of just guessing what the audience is interested or like, you're basing it on data, and therefore are much more likely to end up with a campaign that resonates and give you a higher return on investments. That is pretty much what I had for this session in terms of how we can use profiles to really supercharge your campaigns and really target to the audiences. I'm open for any questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll take it from there. Okay, I can see some questions coming through. So we've got a question around where else have we got profiles in the region? Okay, so in MENA, we are actually live in the UAE, Saudi, and Egypt, and we're just about to expand that to Morocco and Lebanon as well. So those are the markets that we currently have live or are about to go live in MENA. In terms of where profiles already exists, and that list is potentially going to continue to grow as well. So watch this space. If you're interested in finding more, please reach out to us either directly, as I mentioned, or via our partners at PRCA. So yeah. Okay, we've got another question here. How else are clients utilizing the tool besides feeding into the creative process? Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question. So we've got clients that have used it. So they've used a brand engagement framework that we've created at YouGov. So we can sort of split their customers and non-customers into audiences that might be of interest. So for example, those people that are current customers and have strong brand affinity, they've got a strong positive impression of the brand, we can say sit within the protect audience. Those that are current customers that have a slightly negative impression or a neutral impression, they might be in our save category or segment. So we might want to look at them and address them slightly different. So instead of just going out to your entire customer base with the same messaging, you want to target your messaging to the specific audiences based on how we've segmented them. So that's an example of one of our frameworks. Obviously, we've got clients that have already got segmentation or that want to refresh their segmentation. We can do that on our panel. So we can take your golden questions, replicate your segmentation, and then allow you to better understand those subsets within the audience, and really, focus your messaging around what's important to those sub audiences. So, the examples of brands that I've sort of seen. I used to work in the UK office of YouGov, and a lot of our clients that were utilizing it were, sharing feedback on how much more, specific they're able to get in their messaging to specific audiences. So, the classic example is, oh, let's send out this messaging to millennials. In the banking case, there was, constant messaging going out to millennials that was the same. So that was, a whole group of 18 to 34. And through, the analysis that we've done, we were very easily able to show them that people within that, the 18 to 24s were using banking facilities very different to those that were 25 to 34. You might want to go to the 25 to 34 who are looking to get onto the property ladder with mortgaging options, whereas the 18 to 24s wouldn't necessarily be interested. So spending money on reaching out to audiences, you've got to make sure you're going to get the maximum return for your investment, and that's what they're feeding back to us, that they were able to really increase their uptake or their clicks, and by using targeted messaging, and that's where a lot of our clients are really benefiting from using this type of data. We've got another question here. If we have campaign ideas, is there a way to test them easily with the target audience defined using profiles? Absolutely. So one of the great things about profiles is it sits on top of our data and our panel. So we're able to serve any campaign ideas you have to our panelists and get feedback from them on what they think of the ideas. And then understand which groups really the messaging resonated from within that. So, we'd go out to a NatRep audience with the campaign, or a target audience if you want, because they're our panelists, we know who they are, we can recontact the specific groups and see if that messaging is actually resonating, what their thoughts were. So before you actually activate these campaigns that you're spending a lot on, and do your media buy and so on, you can understand if before that, if that messaging is actually going to resonate with the audiences that you're interested in targeting. And that's, again, because we're using our panel, our people to respond, and are able to split the data that we get from that research and understand which audiences it most resonated with. Maybe we need to tweak it for a specific group and so on. Get that well before you actually activate, and save yourself a lot of money and really get a product or a campaign that will resonate with the audience that you're most interested in targeting. Any other questions? Got a question around working in Kurdistan. Do we still have an office there? What is your advice to production companies here? That is a question I'm not necessarily familiar with. I believe we still have an office there. I believe we're still operating. We can certainly look into that and feedback to you after this. What is your advice to production companies here? In terms of advice, if you could just sort of clarify a bit more about what you're interested in finding out. Again, you can do that after the session, or if you want to, I will try and answer that. But if you can just give me a better idea of what you're referring to on that, that would be helpful. Okay, great. I can't see anything else at the moment in the chat box. So if there are no further questions, that's it from me. Feel free to reach out to me, like I said, on the email address that's in the deck or through our partners at PRCA, and they'll be able to sort of reach out to us and flag any additional questions you may have. We're happy to talk to you about how we can help you in your creative process and how you can benefit and leverage the data that we have in these great products here in MENA. And we look forward to working with you all.